Appendix 3. Review of Mixter's Evolution and Christian Thought Today. Russell L. Mixter, Editor, Evolution and Christian Thought Today, Grand Rapids, William B. Erdsman Publishing Company, 1959, 224 pages plus 16 plates. This symposium by 13 authors, published for the November 1959 centennial of Darwin's The Origin of Species, is an appraisal of the theory of evolution by members of the American Scientific Affiliation, ASA, whose purpose, quote, is to study those topics germane to the conviction that the frameworks of scientific knowledge and a conservative Christian faith are compatible, end quote. Each of these essays was subjected to critical review by every other author and revised accordingly. As a summary of the present status of thinking in the various branches of science discussed, this volume is outstanding. While the articles, being of necessity elementary in their treatment, give no indication of the competence of the authors in their respective fields of research, they do give evidence of greater balance and perspective than is displayed by some prominent specialists in these fields. Indeed, from the scientific perspective, the restraint and caution with which the data are studied is the most prominent and noteworthy characteristic of this symposium. From the biblical perspective, the situation is less commendable, nor is there the same respect for biblical data as for scientific reports. Despite the earnestly professed adherence to the Christian faith, a treatment of Scripture which is practically cavalier prevails. Indeed, the title is scarcely justified, in that the Christian aspect is lightly regarded by the scientists and is, in the main, left to the theologian Carl F. Henry. As an oft-repeated instance of this, notice George K. Schweitzer's statement, quote, biblical language is not the precise language of modern-day science. It is popular, phenomenal, and oft-times poetical. Thus, we are not to look for intricate detail, but for basic underlying principles. End quote, 47. Others likewise speak of Genesis 1 in similar terms, as witness Walter H. Hearn and Richard A. Hendry, who see it as, quote, a brief but beautifully poetic narrative, end quote, which, quote, gives little specific information about the ways in which God has worked in nature, possibly because such details are irrelevant to the major theme of his revelation of himself, end quote, 67 following. For them, quote, the legitimate question of limitations imposed by the actual words of Scripture, end quote, is easily answered, quote, the authors of this chapter consider the expressions in Scripture regarding the creation of life to be sufficiently figurative to imply little or no limitation on possible mechanisms. Others may disagree with this conclusion, end quote, 69. But is quote-unquote figurative language an evasion of meaning, or is it not rather an instrument of clarification and a type of precision? This quote-unquote poetic and hence loose and general sense of Scripture is frequently referenced. In view of the fact that Jesus rested the doctrine of life after death on the tense of a verb, Mark 12:18-27, and Paul the covenant of faith in the singular form of seed, Galatians 3:16, it must be asserted that Scripture speaks precisely, even if it does not use the language of the laboratory, which is very far from being the only form of precision. If poetic language eliminates strict interpretation in favor of only, quote, basic underlying principles, end quote, then what happens to the doctrine of the virgin birth? Genesis 1 is highly propositional in contrast to Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 2. The unhappy fact is that Genesis 1 has, in almost every age, been approached with the theological, philosophical, and scientific presuppositions of that age and accordingly interpreted, rather than being permitted with the whole of Scripture to provide those presuppositions. It is to be feared that these men refuse to acknowledge any interpretation of Genesis 1-11 which might put them at radical odds with contemporary science. The basic defect of these studies, however, is philosophical, and then scientific and theological. There is a radical absence of a consistent Christian philosophy of science. Henry, in his essay, written with a gentlemanly restraint of criticism for his scientific fellow writers, nevertheless observes, quote, "What Christian thinkers unfortunately have failed to do is to elaborate a schematic philosophy of science based on revealed theism, from which standpoint forceful questions can be levelled at the competitive secular philosophy of science." End quote. 220. The ASA was very recently summoned to consider the elements of such a philosophy in a forthright and powerful statement of, quote, "The need for an evangelical philosophy of science," end quote, by Thomas H. Leith, Journal of the American Scientific Affiliation, December 1959, 3-13. Let us briefly review some of Leith's comments. He cites Alexander Ross in 1646 as calling attention to the unhappy status of factuality. Quote, "Whereas you say that astronomy serves to confirm the truth of Holy Scripture, you are very preposterous, for you will have the truth of Scripture confirmed by astronomy, but you will not have the truth of astronomy confirmed by Scripture. Sure, one would think that astronomic truths had more need of scriptural confirmation than Scripture of them." End quote. Ibid 7. What is this needed confirmation? Leith states it clearly, quote, "As a man sows his axioms, so shall he reap his deductions. No one can validly deduce more than that with which he begins. If he does not start with God as sovereign, he will not end up with him. Nor can a man induce the biblical God from observations in nature. A God who might act in nature doesn't prove that he did. Also, God is not exhausted in his natural revelation, and it is thus insufficient to give all truth about him, as Hume pointed out long ago." End quote. Ibid 10. Man's criteria, insists Leith, can only be derived from God himself, and a Baconian science which claims to approach factuality without preconceptions is a, quote, "figment of the imagination," end quote. Quote, "Scripture must be seen as the unique revelation of the Archimedean point of truth which is God," end quote. Quote, "Hence the propositions of Scripture become axioms in a truly Christian philosophy," end quote. Ibid 10-12. This view, so ably expounded and safeguarded by Leith, has been extensively developed by Cornelius Van Til and Herman Dooyeweerd, and is defended by others. The approach of this symposium on evolution and Christian thought today is radically different. According to Hearn and Hendry, quote, "Scientific investigations must always be mechanistic in their outlook, because it is only in this narrowed frame of reference that the scientific method can operate. It is probably true that many non-believers have welcomed mechanistic interpretations of this phenomena, and especially of the origin of life, feeling that such interpretations would make belief in God unnecessary. Such an attitude is indicative of a basic misunderstanding of the Christian idea of God and the way by which we come to know Him. Belief in God is never forced upon us, no matter what our level of understanding of natural processes. God cannot be found by scientific knowledge any more than he can by scientific ignorance. The mechanistic view and the teleological, philosophical, or theological view of nature are complementary to each other and not antithetical." End quote. 69. J. Frank Cassell expresses his dissent from this statement, declaring, quote, "A Christian's assumption or presuppositions must be Christian," end quote, but fails to develop this thesis consistently. 163. For it is not enough to hold a Christian faith. The concepts of factuality and hypothesis, as maintained by contemporary scientific thought, are consistently anti-Christian. If it be true that God is the Creator, and that, quote, "the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork," end quote, then all factuality makes an inevitable witness which man either accepts or evades. Psalm 19:1. According to Paul, quote, "the invisible things of him since the creation are clearly seen," end quote, and unbelievers, quote, "hold down," end quote, "the truth in unrighteousness." Romans 1:20, 1:18, quote, "hold down," end quote, or, quote, "holding down," end quote, is considered to be the meaning by Kenneth S. West and many other scholars. To begin with, this presupposition involves holding to a radically different concept of facts and hypotheses from that of scientists who believe in a world of brute factuality, a world lacking design, causality, or purpose, and to be understood in terms of basically mechanistic or naturalistic processes. Such a concept prejudges the outcome far more than do Christian presuppositions, which require a humility before God-given factuality and an honesty with regard to the God-given interpretation of factuality. But what is the approach of the symposium? Wilbur L. Bullock, writing in The Gordon Review, reprinted as Evolution and/or Creation in Eternity, July 1960, 10-12, 31, states, quote, "We must always be willing to examine and alter our position in order to be faithful as we know how to both God's words and God's works, even though this may make us unpopular with our non-Christian colleagues or with our non-Christian friends." End quote, 31. Thus, quote, "God's words and God's works," end quote, "are put on an equality. Scripture and science as equal and either complementary or competing sources. But Scripture cannot be so equated without damage to faith. It does not ask to be a substitute for observation, but to govern the presuppositions of observation. In actual practice, the writers of the symposium base their observations on radically anti-Christian premises and then try to harmonize the results with Christian doctrine so that Scripture, quote, "comes in," end quote, a very lame second. Bullock himself gives evidence of this harmonization in his statement concerning Darwin's concepts of natural selection and survival of the fittest, quote, "But such a proposition is just the naturalistic way of expressing the theological concept of the providence of God," end quote, 119. The truth of the matter is that Darwin's concept is the naturalistic substitute for God's providence, and a substitute concept or imitation concept is as much at odds with the reality as Führer Hitler was with Messiah Jesus. Donald S. Robertson and John Sinclair write, quote, "In evaluating the contribution of genetics to evolution and its significance to the Christian, we must remember that the scientist has assumed a mechanistic universe which he feels can be understood if properly observed and analyzed. His working hypothesis, while engaged in scientific endeavor, has no room for a God that can fortuitously interrupt his smoothly working machine. Since this is the working hypothesis of science, it was only a matter of time before theistic explanations of origins were abandoned in favor of mechanistic ones. Thus, the theory of evolution came along as an inevitable consequence of the scientific procedure." End quote, 89. After this observation, we hopefully look for some recognition that, because evolution is, quote, "the inevitable consequence of the scientific procedure," end quote, on mechanistic and anti-theistic lines, there is need for the reinstitution of Christian presuppositions, and we expect that a radical re-evaluation on those premises will follow. Instead, we find God banished from science. According to Robertson and Sinclair, quote, "In conclusion, it is interesting to note that it is impossible to demonstrate God's creative activity from within the realm of scientific discovery, just as it is also impossible to demonstrate his sustaining activity. However, these relationships of God to his creation are not anti-scientific just because they cannot be demonstrated by science. They are concepts that are outside the realm in which science operates, and thus science has little, if anything, to say about their validity. There are questions that must be answered by faith," end quote, 91. But God can never be, quote unquote, "demonstrated by any activity or system which begins by eliminating him." And the Christian claim is not that God can be demonstrated by the facts, but that no facts can be explained or demonstrated apart from God. And what knowledge the covenant breaker has, he holds on borrowed premises, because, as Van Til has ably and repeatedly pointed out on consistently non-Christian premises, no knowledge is possible. The concluding sentence of Robertson and Sinclair is especially revealing, quote, "These are questions that must be answered by faith," end quote. Some questions are answered according to this symposium by science and others by faith. Hence their insistence, in order to give science free rein on the quote-unquote poetic nature of Scripture, it would be upsetting to take creation and the flood in too strict a sense, and it must be insisted, whatever the textual reading, that a loose sense is the best scientific and religious sense. There is thus a realm for science and a realm for faith, but how to join the two? Sinclair has tried doing just that in an essay on, quote, New Genes, end quote, Journal of American Scientific Affiliation, December 1955, 12 to 14. At this, T. Hinston, Department of Zoology, University of California at Los Angeles, made answer, quote, in my opinion, it is never fitting for a true scientist to deviate from the natural cause explanation. If some god can create new genes out of nothing at will, then there is no point in any of us seeking the basis of life. And as long as there is any doubt in Mr. Sinclair's mind, then he certainly is in the wrong field. His reasoning is very similar to that of the communists who decided that since a supernatural force was indicated, genes could not exist. This is very dangerous reasoning. End quote, Ibid 14. In terms of Hinton's definition, none of the authors of the symposium is a, quote, true scientist, end quote. They begin uniformly on mechanistic premises and seek a natural cause explanation. In this scheme of things, God is a total outsider, and he can only become another name for man's ignorance. Both progressive creationism, evolution with a more pious name, and theistic evolution fail to commend themselves to scientists because they are bastard products, representing a crossing of two hostile strains which produces a sterile offspring. The authors have no desire for conflict between the two strains. It is hardly conducive professionally to advancement. But the results of their forced union are only productive of frailty or sterility. Although we are told that the authors are all, quote, committed to the evangelical doctrine that the world and its living members are the result of the activity of God as declared in the Holy Scriptures, end quote, their outward and emotional adherence to evangelical Christianity does not erase the fact that they are intellectually and scientifically Thomistic in their thinking. 6. Indeed, this volume is a better exposition of Thomistic principles than the Duquesne Symposium on Evolution, 1959. According to Thomism, the reason of autonomous man is capable of impartiality and objectivity investigating the truths of creation by means of philosophy, science, and other disciplines, and only in certain areas where investigation is impossible do revelation and faith enter in to supplement reason. The inevitable consequences of this approach, which made man's science independent and autonomous, was to render God only another name for ignorance or the unknown, and thus hardly anything deserving of faith. As a result, Occam's philosophical razor neatly removes God from the picture as rightly irrelevant and unnecessary. For this symposium, the methodology and underlying philosophy of factuality, hypothesis, and rationality are derived from contemporary science and presuppose a system in which God is, by definition, irrelevant and merely a name for ignorance. Hinton's objection is basically sound, for we cannot switch axioms and presuppositions in midstream. We cannot have one set of premises for our observations and another for our conclusions, as these authors insist on doing. It will not do to point to the similarities between Providence and Darwin's hypothesis. Much more, indeed, can be pointed out. The Darwinian and evolutionary concept of natural processes out-miracles God, in that built-in miracles and omnipotence are presupposed at every step in a blind and insentient process. The evolutionary concept of the universe requires a faith in comparison to which biblical Christianity requires but little. But the evolutionary faith is ready to swallow camels and retain man's autonomy rather than face the offence of accountability and godly creaturehood. These men are evangelical churchmen and Thomistic scientists, an untenable and compartmentalized situation, basically schizoid in nature. They are aware that evolution is by no means proven and may indeed, by the nature of the case, be unprovable. But for them, its validity remains because the presuppositions of their science call for such an explanation. This leads to peculiar statements, as witness the following by James O. Buswell III, quote, "One of the chief drawbacks to the anti-evolutionists from Darwin's early critics to the present day, familiar as some of their leaders are with the data, is that their activities in literature have been almost completely wrapped up in arguments over petty fragments of the record, assuming that to attack evolution as a total philosophy, one must show the data upon which the assumptions are based to be untrue." End quote, 169. Before analysing this amazing statement, it should be noted that Buswell stands out for his willingness to admit that not all creationists must be considered ignorant and, quote, obnoxiously anti-cultural, anti-educational, and anti-scientific, end quote, the, quote, hyper-orthodox, end quote, of Ram's account, cited by Buswell, 168 following. That some opponents of evolution have been such is clearly true, but a fair reading of the past century's history will place the burden of offence with evolutionists. By and large, the symposium's writer find Ram's Christian view of science and scripture very much to their taste. But to return to Buswell's statement, which says in effect, quote, "Don't confuse the issue with facts," end quote. "It seems we are in error in, quote, assuming that to attack evolution as a total philosophy, one must show that the data upon which the assumptions are based to be untrue," end quote, 169. It should be noted that this statement, like every other, was subjected to the editorial scrutiny of every writer. 5. What then is evolution? The writers wanted both as a body of impartial observations of nature open to universal examination, and as a philosophy which is a faith beyond facts and incapable of disproof. At every point, mixed premises predominate and, quote, scientific creationism, end quote, is this strange result. Moreover, it is frequently inferred that because changes have taken place in nature and these changes can be called evolution, we are therefore, if honest, compelled to accept some kind of evolution. By a marvelous process of redefinition, we are all made, quote unquote, evolutionists on penalty of dishonesty. Men can all be made believers in quote unquote God by the same process of redefinition, but it is doubtful if either the cause of science or faith is promoted by such an approach. Even Bullock, who protests against the equation of speciation and evolution by, quote, the average evolutionist, end quote, as quote unquote unfair, still writes in the Gordon Review and Eternity, quote, "As the theory of evolution encompasses in part the small changes which all must accept, it follows that we must admit some evolution has taken place," end quote, 121, Eternity 12. We are repeatedly asked to make a leap of faith from inconclusive data to evolution. For example, Irving W. Knobloch, after a very careful and conscientious survey of what is called, quote, the role of hybridization in evolution, end quote, but is actually a survey of hybridization as such, declares, quote, "If hybridization plays only a minor role in evolution, as some maintain, it is very strange indeed that there are so many vigorous, fertile hybrids in existence today, and more being found each year by those who earnestly search for them," end quote, 103. To quote-unquote prove hybrids is one thing, to quote-unquote prove evolution is another. Again, to demonstrate the reality of one is not to demonstrate the reality of the other, unless by definition everything constitutes proof of the basic presupposition. Knobloch has only demonstrated in terms of a particular approach that hybrids exist. More than that, he has not shown. In view of the complexity of the problem of defining species, the problem of hybrids is correspondingly difficult. The phenomenon is real, but what is it? Knobloch himself clearly states, quote, "There have been almost as many definitions of a species as there are biologists," end quote, 94. Does the present state of knowledge permit the extensive theorizing so prevalent on every side of the issue? The authors are cautious in their surveys of the present state of research, far more so than most writers, but in stating conclusions, they tend to abandon that reserve. V. Elving Anderson writes to the issue in stating that, quote, evangelical Christians need a basic outlook which will permit them to view the growing body of scientific data and hypotheses without fear or hesitation, but with considerable interest and anticipation. This will be possible only as we continue to develop a comprehensive philosophy of science, a statement of the ways in which God is and has been related to the universe, end quote, 134. He finds such a philosophy pointed to by Taylor Lewis in Lewis's statement, quote, it is because the scripture doctrine of the word or logos in nature has so fallen out of our theology that we dread so much the appearance of naturalism, end quote, 135. The citation from Lewis is from J.P. Lange, Genesis, translated with additions by Taylor Lewis and A. Gosman. Carl Henry echoes this emphasis in one clearly unhappy aspect of his essay on, quote, theology and evolution, end quote, and looks for integration, quote, through the recovery of the Logos as the key to creation, revelation, redemption, sanctification, and judgment. In other words, as the center of reference for science, philosophy, religion, ethics, and history, end quote, 221. But the Logos as a principle has been used, and its abstract nature has led to a destruction of Christian categories, as witnessed some patristic thinking. In Thomistic hands, following Aristotle, the Logos as structure brought back meaning to the universe, but it cut loose from God, and faith was given only the areas of mystery beyond the universe. The Logos tends to be understood as either an abstract universal emptying the world of meaning, or as a concrete universal, which, as the basic principle, incarnates meaning in the universe and empties eternity of meaning. Neo-Orthodoxy, by its use of Christ or Logos-centered philosophy, has tried to bridge the gap, but has only succeeded in exhausting God in his relational aspect, and thereby reabsorbing all into flux and relativity and confounding itself. The Logos, in isolation from his ultimate context, becomes an emptied context. The ontological trinity is alone the safe ground for philosophy and the only key to knowledge, as Van Til has elucidated. We regret that evolution in Christian thought today cannot be commended. Its writers are able men, and the purpose of the American scientific affiliation an attractive one. It would be a delight to have the opportunity to praise their work. But the unhappy fact is that the group is a better exponent of Thomism than of biblical Christianity. Even the name reflects this. It is motivated not by a cowardice or by a lust for academic respectability, but by an earnest faith according to which these authors are scientists like every other scientist, carrying on research on the same premises, the only difference between them being religious rather than quote-unquote scientific. This equation and sense of common ground is the essence of Thomism. But can a consistent Christian be Thomist? And should he be a member of an implicitly Thomistic society? The name and the approach typify a philosophy which seeks to escape the offense of biblical faith, but succeeds only in escaping its victory.